Hello, Eat Clean, Get Lean group. It's week 10, and tonight we're going to be talking about carbohydrates. So let me open up my screen. We'll get this party started, so to say. And I just have to go to slideshow and start from the beginning. Okay, week 10, and we're going to be talking about carbohydrates tonight. And we have our little pictures here, and Susan did a wonderful job in doing some nice animation in this week's presentation, so I want to thank her right off the bat. So let's talk about the difference between starchy carbohydrates and fibrous carbohydrates. Starchy carbohydrates are things like potatoes and breads and pasta and rice, versus fibrous carbohydrates, which are more like fruits and green vegetables, things like kale, broccoli, spinach, asparagus, all the things we enjoy. And what this graph demonstrates here is the amount of sugar that's in each of these four foods that I have listed here at the bottom, how much fiber is in each, and how much water is in each. Now, remember when we were talking about keeping your heck in check, we talked about protein, fiber, and water, and then we also talked about carbohydrates. So obviously in carbohydrates, there is fiber and water. But as you look across the screen here, you're going to see some of them are very poor in the amounts of fiber and water, as opposed to some others are more robust. And there's also different sugar levels. Now, the way that the sugar is presented to the body makes a huge difference on the insulin response or the hormonal response to food. So we always talk about the hormonal response to exercise, and we also talk about the hormonal response to food. So let's look at the refined grains. These are things like Italian bread, white rice, most of the sugary cereals you see on television. And these products are so refined that they lost a lot of the nutritive value to them, so much so that they have to be fortified with different vitamins and minerals, or they have it added. So if you look on a loaf of like Wonder type white bread, you're going to see, fortified with all these vitamins and minerals. Well, they had to refortify them because most of the vitamins and minerals and all the nutritive benefits of the food was milled out in the refining process. So, and remember, what they put back in pales in comparison to what Mother Nature put there to begin with. So we have these foods that, these refined grains that are very high in sugar and very low in fiber and water. So the hormonal response to that would be a huge insulin surge. And we remember that insulin is a storage hormone. So we certainly don't want to increase our insulin production, because half of what we eat gets turned into stored body fat. Let's shifting to the right, we go to whole grains. You'll see that's very popular, whole grain cereals and whole grain breads. Well, they kept in a lot of the fiber, which helps with digestion and so forth, but you could still see a tremendous amount of sugar in the product at the end. And the reason for that, again, is because it's still a refined product. It still releases its sugar very, very quickly. And just anytime you have a grain, you're going to have a very high sugar content in the food to begin with. So that's why we always look at how we present our meals and where we include starchy carbohydrates and where we choose not to put starchy carbohydrates in our meals. And I know we've talked about that to quite some extent. Again, shifting to the right, we start getting into the fruits, and now we're starting to see more robust amounts of water and fiber in these two, with much lower levels of sugar. So the hormonal response obviously is a whole lot different. The thing that you're going to get in fruits and vegetables is you're going to get the natural content of the vitamins and the minerals and the other phytofactors. The nutritive nutrients in the food are robust, as opposed to the ones on the left where they're more refined, and a lot of them have been lost in the refining process. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be seeing coming up in the next couple of weeks, if you haven't seen it already, and those are the holiday sugar cookies. So let's talk about what happens when we start to combine fat and sugar. When it comes to adding fat to starch, or sugar. The issue is that these foods are not only the most calorically dense, but may negatively impact biochemistry in such a way that it causes increased food intake at the current meal and cravings for more high-calorie foods at future meals. So this is a situation where people eat dinner and then 2 hours later they're looking for something else, because the way that the food was presented to them at dinner probably caused them to want to overeat later on the night. The other thing to keep in mind, and because I know people are hearing what I'm saying and they remember what I've said in previous weeks, is that if their heck was out of check coming into the meal, they didn't eat enough food earlier in the day, or they ate improperly, again, the same thing can happen. People are going to go from a constant grazing in the evening, looking to eat all the way up to bedtime. So let's talk a little bit about fats and weight gain. Animal studies show that these foods have a hedonistic effect, causing animals not to be able to regulate their hunger and craving centers. These foods may also be the reason behind the concept of food addiction. Eliminating these foods from the diet is often the most powerful thing a person can do. Let me read that again. Eliminating these foods from the diet is often one of the most powerful things a person can do. So we start to eliminate certain foods out of the diet, which helps to break the spell so that people can stop eating them compulsively. Now, you know, Dr. Jade and I have talked about this a couple times, and his idea is this: at some point in time, you may want to start to introduce these foods back in. And I've spoken about this. And the way that he does it is, like, he'll order a dessert, take 2 or 3 bites of it, and then push the rest aside. Or he'll have his wife order the dessert and he takes 2 or 3 bites from her dessert, and then he doesn't have any more. He's also the same guy who buys a whole big chocolate bar in the beginning of the month, and then he has 1 square a night, and it takes him a whole month to eat it. That's fine. If you can do that and you can enjoy food like that, that's fine. But a lot of us who add those type of foods into our diet, it's like giving a beer to an alcoholic. It just doesn't work. So you have to identify what's going to work best for you, and that's what you should do. There are certain things Susan and I don't keep in the house because, for example, if a half gallon of ice cream came into my house at 6 o'clock, it wouldn't make it through the night. So we just don't have it. It's just easier for that way. And that way we stay on track with our food. We stay on track with our health and wellness. So these are the kind of things that we've decided we're going to do. Okay. Now, again, these foods are not this detrimental for every person, but given the issues with calories and brain chemistry, it's best to limit them or to avoid them completely. These foods can include things like cakes, cookies, pastries, but can also include things like pasta, cream sauce, pizza, bagels, cream cheese, and of course, French fries and burgers. So what have we been talking about in the last couple of minutes here? These are all fast foods. These are all things that you can go into a 7-Eleven or a Wawa and buy, or stop in any of the fast food stores. So they're doing these, serving this kind of food because it's fast, it's convenient, and it satisfies you for the moment. But we know long term it's going to affect your brain chemistry, and it's going to affect your hunger and your cravings. So we probably want to try to avoid these things. Now, ironically, the potato can be a great fat loss food when it's eaten in its plain form. But in Western society, it's almost never eaten this way and is instead loaded with fat and salt. I always tell people, if you can combine fat, salt, and sugar, you can get anybody to eat anything. And that's what McDonald's French fries are, right? They're carbohydrate potatoes, sugar, deep fried in fat, and then sprinkled with salt. No wonder you eat them compulsively. And remember the old Lay's potato chip commercial? You can't eat just one? They were right. So let's talk about stress, because stress comes into this equation. And I'm building a platform here, and we're going to be moving on to something in just a moment. Talks about how effectively we can store fat, and there's a formula for it. But let's talk about stress. Weight loss is about more than just the calories. If it was that simple as calories, the obesity problem would be much more solvable. But there's other factors impacting the weight loss battle. One is sleep deprivation. The other is chronic stress. Now, remember, we talked about sleep a couple of weeks ago, and I talked about cortisol and melatonin being the opposite sides of the same coin. So if your cortisol level is too high, you're not going to be able to produce enough melatonin, therefore you're going to have trouble sleeping. Now, cortisol is important for sleep because remember when we talked about cortisol, cortisol is responsible for something called gluconeogenesis, which is nothing more than the body's ability to break protein down, convert to sugar to feed the brain and nervous system. Okay, so we do need cortisol, we just don't need a robust amount of cortisol. So stress and sleep deprivation and chronic stress, they both negatively affect fat loss. Okay, and even though they're calorie free, so you can't eat stress. Well, some of us do, but there's no calories in stress, but you can see how it affects our ability to either store fat or burn fat. It significantly impacts our hunger, motivation to work out, and cravings. So even myself, if I'm stressed out and I'm trying to get some work done, all of a sudden my workout drops down in priority. So I have to make it a priority. Okay, so I have to focus on working on my stress levels so that I can continue to work out as well. So stress and weight gain. So while it's true that calorie excess is required to gain weight, just as calorie deficits are required to lose weight, it is short-sighted to pretend that other factors don't impact fat gain. There is nothing more ignorant and judgmental, in our opinion, than assuming anyone who does not get results from diet and exercise change is not being compliant, or that those who are unable to control their eating are simply overeaters who don't work out, who lack willpower, and should be yelled at and berated. Okay, let me give you the perfect example of this. A lot of times doctors will say, you really need to cut back. I'm going to give you some medication that's going to help you to control your appetite, right? A medication you can't stay on the rest of your life, but a medication just to help you lower your caloric intake. Person does that, and they lose 20 pounds, and maybe even some of their blood levels improve. And they go to the doctor, they weigh in, and they're very excited about that. And then they go away for 3 months, and they go back to resuming a healthy diet, okay? Because they destroyed their metabolism by eating less and probably exercising too much, because that's what helped them to lose the weight in the first place. Okay, as soon as they go back to their normal eat more, exercise less, the weight comes back on, and it comes back on with a vengeance. And of course, the doctor says, well, why were you cheating? You had to be cheating. You weren't complying in your program. You say, well, I was following the diet you gave me, all those healthy, natural foods. You told me to eat. I ate them. And, well, you must have been doing something wrong. Well, maybe it was just poor advice from the beginning. That's why we teach the eat less, exercise less, and the eat more, exercise more model. And we talk about getting your heck in check. And we talk about all the things that you do if your heck goes out of check or you're not losing weight. We have a whole drop-down list of things that you do. And we've talked about that numerous times. So again, that's all in your handouts. Any questions? That's where the coaching comes in. That's where Susan and I help. So eat less, exercise more. Well, eating less, exercise more, we know is not the answer. In fact, fat gain and weight loss is a multifactorial, and it's also individualized. It involves understanding individual genetics, unique metabolic expression, psychological sensitivities, and even personal preferences. But there does appear to be some overarching themes. So here's the fat gain formula I talked about a few minutes ago. Do you want to know what the fat gain formula is? Well, here it is. It's high fat along with high sugar combined with high stress. This is the recipe for fat gain. Now, sure, you get fat overeating anything. In fact, on that fact, we can agree, except that it's virtually impossible for any free living human who gorges with chicken and greens to do so. It just won't happen. So what's in that little equation I just talked about with the chicken and the greens? Protein and fibrous carbohydrates and water. All the things that help to keep your heck in check and help you to lose weight. Okay, but when you have a diet of pancakes with syrup in the morning, pizza for lunch, and a big bowl of pasta for dinner, what are you doing? You're eating high fat and high sugar, and combine that with stress, you're going to have weight gain. So a high fat sugar combination has been shown in mammals to completely disrupt the normal metabolic regulation that occurs with either the high fat or high sugar diets. So this combination is not only a higher calorie diet, but it seems to have the impact of assuring we continue to crave high fat, high sugar foods in the future as well. The combination of these two items alters brain chemistry in a way that disrupts the natural ability to self-regulate calorie intake. The bottom line, fat and sugar will sabotage your willpower. Okay, so look at what we're looking at here. Donut is the perfect fat gain food. It's white refined sugar, which is a starch, then it's deep fried in fat and then covered with more sugar. All right, so there is your perfect fat gain food. Another perfect fat gain food is pizza. Okay, it's high fat cheese on white flour, and there's even sugar in the sauce. So fat gain formula, here's how it works. You have a control center for appetite in your brain that resides in a place called the hypothalamus. There are chemicals that stimulate eating called neuropeptide Y, NPY. I'm going to talk about NPY a lot. So just remember NPY and a Gaudy related peptide. Okay. Now there's one hormone that helps to suppress food intake, propionimelatonin corticotin. And think about this. NPY and AGRP are the feeding gas pedals. So you see Susan with the gas pedal there on the left. Okay, those are the things that make you hungry and want to eat more. Think of the POMC as the brakes on food intake. So if you're wondering how hunger hormones like ghrelin and leptin figure into this, they work by impacting these chemicals. Now, ghrelin is your hunger hormone. When your ghrelin levels go up, you're going to have more of an increased feed drive. And we've talked about that in the past. Leptin is what tells the brain whether it's okay to burn fat or you need to store fat. So think of these NPY and AGRP are things that they would increase leptin and they would also increase ghrelin. And POMC would be the exact opposite. So let's talk a little bit more about the fat gain formula. Two diets containing the same number of calories can impact these hunger regulation chemicals differently. Fat and sugar in combination seems to short circuit the hunger centers, resulting in a constant desire for food. Okay, so there's a hormonal impact to the foods we eat. So let's go through this again real quick. You have fat and sugar times stress. Okay, so that's the fat combined with sugar magnified by the stress. Stress is the cherry on the top of this fat storing sundae. So if you are a savvy fat loss lifestyle or a fitness professional, when you think stress, you think cortisol. And if you're really savvy, you'll also think about catecholamines. And if you're really, really savvy, you will think of one more hormone, NPY. Remember that one? NPY is involved with hunger in the brain and is also released from the sympathetic nervous system during times of stress. Let's back up for a second here. Okay, so we know cortisol is released when your body is under stress. Now, why is it released when your body goes under stress? Cortisol helps to convert protein to energy, quick energy, because you're going into a fight or flight situation. You're either going to fight off a wild animal or an attacker, or you're going to run away. Either way, you're going to need energy. Catecholamines are your excitatory hormones that come from the adrenal glands, your epinephrine, norepinephrine. They ramp the body up and prepare it for a fight or to run away. Now, there's going to be times that we want to stimulate the fight or flight chemicals. When do we want to do that? In a burst training type situation or a controlled exercise environment. What we don't want to happen is you're sitting in a business meeting, you get really stressed out and you're not moving. That's when things go bad. But in certain situations, like running away from a car that's barreling down on you, you better have plenty of energy. So obviously it's a life-saving situation there, but we want to stimulate that as well so that the body will be able to be in a position where it can burn more stored body fat. Let me go ahead and expand on this a little bit. When you're under acute stress, you release more of the catecholamines and cortisol. When you're under chronic stress, you release more NPY. All right, so there you go. Acute stress is sprinting. Chronic stress is sitting at your desk wondering what you're doing all day. And unlike the catecholamines and cortisol, which are mainly catabolic hormones, meaning, remember, we talked about they help to burn fat, NPY makes you gain fat, especially when it's around cortisol. Now, remember what we said about cortisol. Cortisol has different actions depending on who it's hanging out with. So when cortisol is hanging out with human growth hormone, which you get a huge surge of when you're exercising and you're doing burst training, okay, you burn fat. But when cortisol is hanging out with NPY or hanging out with insulin, what does it do? It helps you to store fat. So when NPY is released in large amounts, it causes fat cells to go from immature baby fat cells to full-grown mature fat cells. And cortisol makes the body more responsive to NPY. So in other words, NPY makes fat cells grow, and cortisol makes it more efficient at doing so. So a double whammy there. Confused? Let's review again. Chronic continuous stress, lack of sleep, releases a unique mix of NPY and cortisol. Cortisol combined with catecholamines, like it is in the short-term stress, helps us to burn fat. So cortisol and one of your other stress hormones that comes in exercise, again, is human growth hormone, testosterone. Okay, it helps us to burn fat. But cortisol combined with NPY, as it is in chronic stress, equals increased fat cell growth. You guys didn't know I had the phone next to me, did you? I got to let that ring out. Whoever it is, we're going to call back. So another interesting aside about some of these studies is on rats. Even when you feed mice high levels of fat and sugar, obesity is not guaranteed. But add stress on top and boom, it seems you can induce obesity very quickly. One final note on stress, weight gain response. Low-calorie diets increase cortisol levels and perceived psychological stress. And some researchers believe that this is one of the key reasons they fail. So let's talk a little bit more. I got more on fat gain formula. A high-fat diet has the same number of calories as a high-fat, high-sugar diet, has a very different impact on metabolism. The metabolism adapts to high-fat diet by decreasing appetite. So after a few weeks, the calories are no longer high. This explains why studies on high-fat diets like Atkins diet usually show a low-calorie, not a high-calorie intake over time. The metabolism adapts. So that's the high protein and the high fats, low carbohydrate diet. The high fat and sugar combination creates the exact opposite changes in the hunger signaling molecules in the brain and results in insatiable hunger that continues. Ironically, this change is almost exactly the same pattern seen in starvation. As we see that high fat, high sugar foods are not just simply high calorie, but they also cause us to lose our ability to regulate and suppress hunger. They cause hypophagia, which is just a fancy medical term for continuous eating. And when we add chronic stress on top of this, we create the perfect fat storing atomic bomb. Carbs are a hot topic of discussion for us. Our clients are often initially obsessed by their impact, mostly because of the information overload that's out there on this topic. So eliminating carbs completely is not the answer. Manipulating your intake of them and noting how they impact your body is. So don't ask yourself if you should eat carbs, rather ask yourself when you should be eating carbohydrate. So carbs you want to eat for fat loss. Eat all carbs from the green list of foods in unlimited fashion. These are primarily all the non-starchy vegetables and low-sugar fruits, things like berries, apples, pears, and citrus. Okay. In addition, find your tolerance for the sweeter fruits and the wet starches. Remember to include the skin when eating potatoes and never add fat to them. Okay. Put mustard on your sweet potatoes. You'll love them. Many people who have eliminated carbs and suffered low energy and cravings will notice amazing changes through adding back the wet starches. Oats, beans, rice, quinoa, among others, have amazing benefits on HEC and get you moving in the right direction. So a lot of people not eating any carbohydrates at all, and they get bad energy and they start to lose their HEC. Well, by adding in the starch at night, it's going to help you to balance out your blood sugar, help with your brain chemistry, and help with your sleep. Remember, chronic lack of sleep is a chronic stress, and that combined with high fat, high sugar foods is going to increase weight gain. So don't let the carb Nazis convince you to avoid something that might be beneficial. These foods can certainly play a great role in your fat loss journey. And that's where the coaching comes in. This is where Susan and I are here to help you with these things. So avoid the fat starch combination. If you are skeptical of this, just look at the amount of wet starch Asian countries consume. They eat much more rice than we do in the Western world, and yet still remain slim. What they also do is eat plenty of produce and do not add excessive fat and salt to the starch they eat. So when you think of your tolerance for more starchy and sweet foods, it's also helpful to use a tool we call the carbohydrate tipping point. This is the amount of starchy and sweet foods you can eat that stabilizes HEC, gives you great performance in the gym, and does not cause you to slow fat loss or increase fat gain. This is different for all of us, and there's no greater use of your time as a diet detective than to solve this equation for yourself. So there's several aspects to this concept: the carbohydrate amount, the carbohydrate type, and the carbohydrate timing. Let's get into that a little bit. So carb amount. The carbohydrate amount is self-explanatory. You learned about this when we introduced you to the detective tool called AIM. You simply start your process following the 3-2-1 or the 3-2-2 structure we gave you. Then you tweak and adjust depending on your results. This may involve raising or lowering the amount of carbs by several bites or grams. So that's pretty easy. We talked about this. We went through the whole check down on what to do if your HEC is not in check, or if your HEC is in check, or you're gaining weight, or you're losing weight. Okay? And again, my job and Susan's job is to coach you through this. The carbohydrate type is a little more tricky to work with. You have just learned all the different types of carbs. There are non-starchy veggies, the high water, low sugar fruits, the sweeter fruits, the wet starches, and the dry starches. Eat the majority of your carbs in the form of vegetables and less sweet fruit, and then add in other types as needed to balance your HEC and burn fat. So again, most of us, we should be eating a starch with our evening meal to help balance our blood sugar, balance out our brain chemistry, and to help us sleep. Carb type. One other aspect of carb type is important, and that is carbohydrate allergy potential. In addition to the types of carbs we mentioned above, there are also carbs that have a higher allergy potential than others. You want to focus on the low allergy producing carbs, or what we know as hypoallergenic carbs. These carbs include ones that are low in chemicals that irritate the gut or cause immune reactions in the body. You may have heard that some people, certainly not all, as nutrition alarmists would have you believe, can have immune reactions to gluten, which is present in many grains, especially wheat, spelt, rye, and so forth. Other carbs have high amounts of lectins and saponins, which can irritate the lining of the gut and cause issues. These include the grains, beans, legumes, and white potatoes. If you find yourself sensitive to these issues, choose vegetables, fruits, sweet potato, rice, and quinoa. These are the least likely starches to cause issues. You will have to experiment if this is an issue or not. And then carb timing strategies. As they say, timing is everything. Here are a few strategies that might work for you. If you already employ one and it is working, don't be a research chaser, just stick with it. Eating all your carbs post-workout. Carbohydrates are a major stimulator of the muscle building and fat storing hormone insulin. Post-workout is a great time to include carbs because exercise is an insulin mimicker. Just the act of contracting your muscles will increase the number of glucose receptors on cells like the muscle cells. This is the same thing insulin does. So eating most of your starch after a workout allows for increased glucose uptake by muscles, which increases glycogen storage and muscle protein synthesis with less insulin needed. This accentuates the muscle building impact of insulin and de-emphasizes any fat storing effects. Translation, the best of all the worlds. So this is a great time to have carbs, especially if muscle gain is what you're after. Do keep in mind that overloading on carbs post-workout will immediately slow fat burning down. So it's all about not just the type and the timing, but the amount. There's another strategy, eating all your carbs in the morning. Insulin sensitivity is highest in the morning and an overnight fast, and after an overnight fast, and lowest in the evening after a full day of meals. This means there is less of a negative impact from starch in the morning compared to the evening, with all else being equal. This morning approach may also cause some adjustment of the leptin curve, making it start to peak in the early evening instead of the middle of the night, which you can have benefits of reducing hunger in the evening. If you find you're ravenous at night, first increase your protein. If that doesn't work, try this approach with your carbs. The morning strategy works well if you prefer a morning workout or if you're finding you're dragging during the day. It also works for you if you wake up craving pastry and coffee. Now, I will tell you, this does not work for me. I don't need carbs in the morning. I need carbs at nighttime because I need help with my sleep. Some people, they wake up in the morning and they really feel like I need carbs now. I'm not going to get through this day unless I get my carbohydrates in. So it's very, very important that you become a diet detective and figure out what's going to work best for you. Here's another strategy. Eat carbs before or during the meal at which you crave them. This is a particular time of day when you tend to crave starchy foods. There are two strategies to try. One is to have your carbohydrates before that time, beat the craving essentially. As an example, let's say you crave sweets or bread at 3 p.m. most afternoons. Ask yourself about your last meal at lunch. Did you skip carbs or overload on them? This will tell you a lot of the possible approach that may work for you. Perhaps you need to trade in the gigantic boo-boo burrito for a salad at lunch. Or perhaps you want to add a bit of starch to your tossed salad and chicken breast. Or maybe you want to save your carb allotment for the late afternoon snack, and you can relax and attack the craving head on. So a lot of people might have a food bar in the afternoon or a piece of fruit. Eating carbs at night. Carbohydrate intake is believed to raise serotonin in the brain. Although the discussion on this topic has sparked some controversy. Essentially, insulin pushes most other amino acids into the tissue, leaving tryptophan with less competition to cross the blood-brain barrier, raising serotonin in the process. Serotonin is a relaxing brain chemical that can aid sleep. The other thing having starch at night can do for you is lower cortisol and catecholamine levels, which can be elevated at night with people who experience insomnia. This strategy also works well for those who work out in the evening or crave starch at night. This strategy may also help curb cravings the next day. This is me. I need my starches at nighttime. It helps me to sleep. Fine-tuning the strategy. These strategies are not one size fits all, and any expert who tells you otherwise is wrong. If you're at this stage and you want to tweak your approach to eating carbs further, consider the following. First, reduce your overall starch intake. Secondly, eating starch at only specific times of the day. 3, limit starchy carbohydrates to 20 to 30 bites per day to start. We equate a bite as 1 tablespoon or about 5 grams of carbohydrate. So this is about 100 to 150 grams of starchy carbohydrate per day. We like bites because it's easy to titrate down as needed compared to weighing and measuring. Okay, so that's it for tonight, guys. I hope everybody enjoyed my little presentation. I hope what happened is I created more questions than answers. And this is where Susan and I can get in and coach you. We gave you some basic information here. Now it's your turn to come back to us and say, okay, I'm doing this with breakfast, I'm doing this with lunch, I'm doing this with dinner, and this is working for me. I'm losing weight, my heck's in check, or this isn't working for me. I'm hungry, I have cravings, I have low energy. What do I need to change? Okay, I would like everyone to have that opportunity to work with Susan and I in that capacity. That's it for tonight. I'm going to, there's no questions, so I'm going to stop here. And I'm looking forward. We have 2 more weeks, guys. We have week 11 and week 12, and then we're done. But as I promise everybody, I will get you through New Year's. So even after these webinars have ended, we can still get together on a Wednesday night. I can do just questions and answers. Okay, so everybody have a great night, and I'll talk to you shortly. Bye-bye.